have about 50 minutes of presentation, and after, Professor José Crisóstomo de Souza from Federal University of Bahia will comment on Professor's lecture. So now, Professor Maura, you can start your speech. You have 50 minutes speech, so take your time. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you in this conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to this conference and to share my thoughts with you. As you can see from my presentation, my talk is focused on democracy, and this is it's very interesting for me to focus on democracy in this particular historical moment, because I witness, and we all can witness, that the very idea of democracy is in question. So the focus of my talk is about how we can renew this idea of democracy. How can we think it through, focusing on its ethical and dimension and its practical implications. And I believe that this focus on the ethical and practical dimensions of democracy can be brought about by a reflection which starts from the ideas of John Dewey and Jane Addams. So the pragmatist framework is the main reference of my speech. So I want to start with Samuel Huntington, who describes the pattern of the process of global democratization between the 19th and the 20th century. And he sees this pattern as articulated into three waves. A first slow wave of the 19th century, which starts before the First World War, and it's focused mainly in European countries and United States. A second wave, which starts after the Second World War, and which takes place in Europe, because Europe needs to be reconstructed after the dominance of fascism and Nazism, and Africa. A third wave, which beginning in the mid-70s, mainly in South Europe, followed also by Latin America and Asia. So we have also different localization of these three waves of democracy. Huntington speaks about democratization mainly in political terms. So he speaks about a process which leads to the establishment of forms of government based on the level of extent of open, free, and fair elections, limitation on political power, so control and by the people of political power, institutionalization and stability of regular forms of government, and electoral competition and widespread voting participation. So these are the patterns that we can follow to identify if a state has been has been led towards a process of democratization or not. And we can see that also. Okay. And in our times, we can see that through the rise of the globalization processes, We have also witnessed the theorization of a cosmopolitan or transnational version of democracy. So a version of democracy that could be exported, for example, or can be a general frame of reference for all the countries, which does not take into account cultural differences, political differences, historical differences. And so this would involve this transnational version of democracy involves the construction of a new global constitutional order based on a double democratization of political life. So between and across states, with the aim of constructing a political order of democratic associations, cities and nations, as well as of regions and global networks. But this theorization has been strongly criticized by political communitarians and political realists. So these critics have opened up an intense debate on the risk of globalization and the role of transnational institutions in the advancement of a democratic understanding, because this also leads to the idea, to contrast the idea that there is only one version of democracy that could be brought about transnational organizations. And at the same time, also, the debate is very complex and articulated because there is a call for a deliberative version of democracy, which is mainly aimed at supporting the construction of a rationally regulated communication and consensus, which will organize the public sphere. So democracy is mainly seen as the outcome of a process of rationalization of discourses and communicative practices. But also we can witness the advocacy for a radical and agonistic version of democracy, which is based mainly on the idea that the process of construction of a democratic social order implies also a continuous challenging of the oppressive power relation existing in society. So there should be the acknowledgement of the role, the political role of difference and dissent in order to construct a really democratic society. And also we witness to the necessity to include a variety of perspectives and voices in the democratic discourse, which also implies the reference to a dialogic and inclusive idea of democracy, and a shift towards listening procedures to support processes of recognition, representation, and reconciliation within the democratic sphere. So there are different versions, different focuses on what we mean for democracy, what we should intend for democracy within our cultural and social area of the debate and of discourse. It is true that the Western neoliberal democratic narrative now is not more the leading narrative, and this narrative is contrasted by the three counter narratives, which mutually reinforce each other, and these counter narratives are very strong right now. The first one, for example, is clearly visible, for example, in Turkey and in Iran, emphasizes an edge trade-off between state security and individual liberty. So there is a sacrifice of the rights of citizens in order to ensure their protection and the maintenance of the state and the order and the social order. The second narrative is mainly supported by China and emphasizes the incompatibility of some cultures with liberal democracy, universalistic vision on the basis of the recognition and respect of cultural differences, and contrast this narrative contrasts the dissemination of a democratic model, affirming that the principle of sovereignty and non-interference among states. And the third, mainly sustained by Russia, claims that the Western democratic ascets produce a moral decay and promotes the return to local and traditional heritage and values opposed to the Western model of development and governance. So democracy should be renewed with us to the need of a new and different narrative of democracy. In the last 20 years, in particular, research in the field of political and social studies has highlighted the growing of a post-democratic asset for Western Europe and North American democracy. And this is caused by the processes of deregulation, erosion of collective organization, and loss of collective organizational capacity. And globalization has an important role in this process. Neoliberalization and privatization, all these processes have eroded democracy from within. And even in the countries where democracy seems to be a consolidated cultural and political experience, a combination of deluded citizens' expectation and decreasing trust in political life, negative media reports, individual and collective perception of somewhat weak performance of democratic governments, determines a disaffection towards politics and democratic institutions. And this has produced significant fluctuations of system support. So even in countries where democracy seems to be not in discussion, as a matter of fact, democracy itself is in discussion. And so if we go back, we can see that John Dewey's idea regarding democracy can be useful to reconstruct a different narrative of democracy, a narrative which is mainly focused on some, as I told before, practical implication of the idea of democracy, which is not considered as a form of government, but as a form of associated life. And these ethical implications of democracy are very clear in the early works of John Dewey, in the early exploration of the idea of democracy, which has been developed in the 1880 work, The Ethics of Democracy. And it is interesting that this publication, this work, was written while John Dewey was entering the experience of Chicago years, and he met Jane Addams and the experience of Hull House, and he was a trustee. He became a trustee in Hull House. So there is a deep influence of this experience on Dewey's democratic thinking, Dewey's democratic idea. And I agree with Barbara Stengel, who says that in that period, Dewey was searching for a way to instantiate his thinking about democracy, about Christianity, and about experimentalism. So all the three issues were together and were interwoven in his reflection on democracy. And the experience of Hull House was particularly relevant for this thinking about democracy and his interweaving his focus on his reflection on democracy, Christianity, and experimentalism in this period. And his relationship with relationship with Jane Addams was particularly interesting because Dewey thought that Jane Addams had a particular attitude, epistemic and also practical attitude, that he defined mental non-resistance. So he saw that the capacity to tear away, this is a quotation from Dewey, to tear away the armor plate of prejudice, convention, isolation that keeps one from sharing to the full in the larger and even the more unfamiliar and alien ranges of the possibilities of human life and experience, are an epistemic attitude which is determinant, is relevant in democratic and in developing a democratic attitude and democratic understanding of the social life. And he saw in the experience of Hull House the way that people met, discussed social issues, and tried to overcome problems through the sharing of a process of inquiry was the model of what Dewey thought could be democracy. And so, in democracy and social ethics, that is also the Addams' contribution to a reflection on democracy. We can see that there are many elements that are very strongly connected to the idea, to Dewey's idea of democracy. And so there is a strong, it seems that it's a joint elaboration of the idea of democracy, starting from the experience of Hull House and then going back to Dewey's reflection on Christianity and experimentalism, and going back again to the real and concrete experience of the Chicago Laboratory School, where that was an educational experiment within which Dewey also tried to insert his vision of democracy and the education for democratic citizenship. Okay, I try to go on and okay. Okay, let me see if I can go on with the, okay. In the John Dewey's The Ethics of the Democracy in particular, we see democracy conceived as a moral challenge. And this idea that democracy is a moral challenge calls for a strong focus on the social organization. And the social organization was conceived by Dewey according to an organismic metaphor. So democracy, he says, that approaches most nearly the ideal of all social organization, that in which the individual and society are organic to each other. So individual and society should be seen as two elements that are growing together. We cannot see the growing of a society without seeing and without focusing on the growth of the individual. And the concept of growth, which is central to Dewey's educational philosophy, is also central to his political philosophy. So which we can call democratic a society which supports the growth of individuals. And this has political, strong ethical and political implication, because if democracy should have as its outcome the growth of individuals, this implies an ethical commitment. And democracy, he says, is social and has an ethical implication, and its ethical significance is based significance as governmental. So democracy is a form of government only because it is a form of moral and spiritual association. So the choice to be governed through a democratic pattern, a democratic way to organize the political life is a choice which comes after the ethical establishment of a society, of the associated life. So it's like a consequence of this. And also another important element in this idea of democracy, in this ethical idea of democracy, is the acknowledgement that there should be a personal responsibility. So the notes of democracy, according to Dewey, are connected to the fact that the individuals take part of the democratic processes and they share. Each one shares his personal responsibility towards the achievement of the democratic goal. So it's not the idea, the democratic citizens is not an impersonal citizen, but is a person with his own commitments and his own responsibility towards the world, towards the social sphere. And another important focus is that there is a strong relationship between, in this thought, there is a strong relationship between democracy and science. As I told before, Dewey was thinking about experimentalism. And experimentalism is the pattern of inquiry, that is the basis of the advancement of scientific thought, scientific inquiry on the issues that we encounter in our life. And so science and ethics are the two complementary tools of a project of social reconstruction according to a democratic perspective. And I like very much this metaphor that Dewey uses regarding the world. He said that the world that we observe and the world within which we make experiments and we make scientific inquiry is a democracy because it's made of differences. And it's made of elements that are interconnected. And that's why the word and democracy are consistent, are specular. The difference, Dewey says, the difference which makes a fact what it is not an exclusive distinction, but a matter of position and quantity, an affair of locality and aggregation. Traits which place all facts upon the same level, since all other observable facts also possess them, and are indeed conjointly responsible for them. Laws are not the edicts of a sovereign being of a world of subject otherwise lawless. They are the agreements, the compacts of facts themselves, or in the familiar language of Mill, the common attributes, the resemblances. That is why the emphasis of modern science upon control flows from the same source. Interest is in the new, in extension, in discovery. Inference is the advance into the unknown, the use of the established to win new words from the void. And so the nature of scientific inquiry is connected to the nature of the world conceived as a scenario that resembles the scenario where democratic life takes place. And also, I want to focus on the idea that science, in this vision, science is an important tool to bring about democracy, because the model of scientific inquiry, which is the model of the pattern of any kind of scientific thinking for Dewey, is the tool that we can use to face and solve social problems. So to use the pattern of inquiry is essential to the understanding of the social problems, and also to the solution, the collective solution of social problems, using the experimental attitude and using the pattern of inquiry. So the pattern of inquiry is a tool to build up democracy, conceived as a space of experimentation of ideas and solutions. And Jane Addams, as I told before, also focused her reflection on democracy on its ethical implications, and in particular in democracy and social ethics, says that democratic life requires an ethical transformation of social structures. So the term democratic is not connected to a feeling. So we feel that we should have a democratic life, and we should share a democratic experience. But she thinks that democracy is a rule of life and also a test of faith. So we should have democracy as a pattern to follow, a practical guide, a practical reference to follow. And if we go on in our life following this practical guide, also this is we can have an outcome in the evaluation of our institutions, in our activities, and the process of the regulation of our associated life. So democracy, according to Jane Addams, is a normative and practical reference for the individual and collective life, but it's also the empirical condition of associated life. So we should have these conditions in order to live together. And also, it is the context where it is possible to test and validate ideas, opinions, and values. But also is the context we can determine our ideas through what she calls a sound judgmental practice. So through a rigorous and sound judgmental practice, we can validate our ideas and opinions, and we can test the rightness of our references. It is important to see that Dewey's reflections on democracy was situated within a debate regarding also the economical conditions, because Dewey was trying to understand, to explore the possibility to combine industrial capitalism and democracy, and to see if it could be possible to have a project of industrial democracy. And this focus on these economical and social issues has been developed in several several reflections, in particular in the need of an industrial education in an industrial democracy, is the place where John Dewey tries to imagine the possibility to develop a project of industrial democracy. And this has a sound educational implication, because in order to develop this project, there should be a common and general educational process, which should lead to the overcoming of class divisions. Dewey was thinking of a society without classes, and in sustaining the development of individual capacities based on the identification of the most significant productive processes and the engagement of individuals in vocational pathways. And Jane Addams also was analyzing the economic and social conditions of a peaceful and democratic society. And Jane Addams was very aware that the uncontrolled industrial capitalism could be identified as the primary cause of domestic and internal violence. So an uncontrolled capitalism could lead to the development of violent social struggles that could menace the development of democracy. And we see that Dewey and Addams were located. Their reflection was located in the first wave of the construction of democracy. So democracy was very fragile. It was establishing itself, and was also trying to find some roots and some grounds. And Jane Addams also supported and inspired Dewey in a reflection on the risks of an uncontrolled liberalism. And it's not a case that Dewey dedicated liberalism and social action to the memory of Jane Addams, because in this work Dewey described the advancement of industrial democracy in terms of a process of liberation from material insecurity and from the coercion and repression that prevent multitudes from the participation in the vast cultural resources that are at hand. So Dewey was very critical with the classic idea of liberalism, and he thought that liberalism, in order to support democracy, should overcome all the new models of economic development, and should overcome also this dichotomy of all the new models, and should try to bring about a different interpretation of the society. And a society which is not focused on the individual separated from society. So the idea that individual is something separated from society, but that the individual and society go together, and the society should be the place where the individual can perform his life and could give his contribution to the evolution to the evolution of the democratic order. And in Democracy and Education, Dewey deepens his understanding of the limits of industrial capitalism. And this analysis is mainly focused on what we should conceive as an educational frame of reference for what he calls the industrial democracy. This project could be a sustainable cultural and political and social project only if it is developed on the basis of a sound educational process, which means that also education should not be subordinated to capitalism, should not be subordinated to the industrial advancements, but on the contrary, industrial advancement should be supportive to the advancement of a new educational model. So the education should not be supportive, for example, for the industrial development, should not be supportive for providing workforce to industry, but industry should be should provide contents and elements of reflection to education, and also should provide, for example, spaces of implementation of educational ideas, but not the contrary. So the UN idea of democracy developed within this within this framework is an idea that is focused focused on the way people carry on their life. So the famous quote that democracy is not a form of government, but a form of associated life, means that this idea of democracy embeds ethical and practical elements, which have to do with individual and collective action, emotional and relational elements, which have to do with ways of being together, building and cultivating relationships, and also epistemic and cognitive elements that have to do with the types of judgment, reasoning, and thought that support the maintenance and development of a democratic society based on reflective processes. And in philosophy and democracy, Dewey also focuses on the idea of equality and the relationship between the idea of the equality and the idea of democracy. In social and moral terms, this means that equality does not mean mathematical equivalence, but what Dewey says is the inapplicability of considerations in terms of greater and lesser, superior and inferior. And this implies that the quantitative differences of ability of strength, position, wealth are irrelevant compared to the fact that individuality is the manifestation of something irreplaceable. So uniqueness is the core of what Dewey intends and understands as equality. So every existence should be taken into consideration for itself and not as something that can be equivalent or transformable into something else. So the result of this idea is the metaphysical mathematics of the immeasurable, in which each individual speaks for himself and demands consideration for himself, to the extent that democracy is not made up of original people, geniuses, heroes, of divinities, but of individuals associated who interact with each other, and this interaction makes everyone's life richer in meaning. And this element is very important to focus on the idea that in a democratic society, each and every individual counts, as it should have its own place, and the interaction of different individuals means that the possibility to interact and to live and to express each one his own resources and capabilities is the core of democratic asset. And in the same years, in education and social direction, John Lewis points out that the unsolved problem of democracy is the construction of an education. So Dewey stresses the strong relationship between education and democracy. If there is not an educational frame of reference, education project aimed at developing a way of being together and based on the expression and the capacity of each individual, there should not be democracy. There could not be democracy. So the unsolved problem of democracy is the construction of an education which will develop that kind of individuality, which is intelligently alive to the common life and sensitively loyal to its common maintenance, and calls for that type of education which will discover and form the kind of individual who is the intelligent carrier of social democracy. Each individual has its own capacities, strengths, and weaknesses, but each individual should contribute to the democratic order through his capacity to think intelligently, and to solve intelligently social problems. So democracy, as Dewey sees, is the socialized extension of intelligence. Is the outcome of a process where within which each individual can perform his capacity to judge and to explore educational and political and social problems. And a democratic space is a public space. So it's a space where individuals can also speak their ideas, can discuss their ideas, confront their ideas. And we can see this focus on the public sphere and the capacity of individuals to contribute to the public debate in the public and its problems, where Dewey explains that the formation of states must be conceived as an experimental process. And this experimental process means that even democracy is the outcome of an experimental process, and is the constant outcome of the several explorations and experimentations of good ways of being together. So democracy is not established once forever. It's the constant outcome of an experimental work that should be led by several individuals who think together, who intelligently analyze and explore social issues together. And that's why the more we spread intelligence, the more we can have the possibility to develop democracy. And so the essential need is the improvement of the methods and conditions of debate, discussion, and persuasion, which depends upon freeing and perfecting the process of inquiry. And we again see that democracy intended as a socialized extension of intelligence can depend on the power also to use and to share the resources at hand in society. And so society which uses, he says, the constructive in a constructive way the experimental method. It's a society that is the outcome, is a function of education. And this role of educational institutions has an important role in the harmonization of the social sphere. And so educational institutions are themselves institutions which warrant the possibility to have a democratic social order. So a democratic society is self-educational to the extent that through the educational process, the society becomes open-minded, inquiring, self-correcting, and morally committed to the growth of its members, of each and every member. But it can sustain itself only through the cultivation of communities within which intelligence is intended as a cooperative process. And this cooperative process is used in behalf of promotion of a shared culture, a shared sense of the common good, a shared commitment to the realization of the best conditions of life.
2 more minutes, please, Professor.
Okay, yes. And I'm coming to the end. This is the same period when Adams is reflecting on the democracy intended as an imaginative process, because Adams says that when we focus on the creation of a democratic society, we work on the development of a democratic way of thinking. And this democratic way of thinking requires to combine 2 different epistemic positions, an imaginative and utopian position. So we see what we can imagine in the future, and we expect and we desire. But also there should be a realistic position. What we can do now, what are the social and political and economic conditions where we live in, and what is the real possibility to bring about our ideal. So there is this combination of these 2 elements that are the core of what we can identify as an imaginative process. And this requires what Jane Addams called a rigorous thinking, a thinking that is capable to build a bridge between what we want to achieve and what is possible. So combine all the new ideas, opportunities, and unlikely possibilities. And democracy is a tentative way to go on towards an ideal, but also being localized and situated within the actual social order. And this is what also sustains the idea that democracy is a creative, self-corrective and ongoing process. When Dewey says that democracy is the task before us, he says that democracy is based on the idea, on the faith of in human nature, and also on the faith in the role of consultation, conference, or persuasion. But the democracy is not here. We see that democracy is a task that we should continuously perform and look towards. It's something that we should try to perform as citizens, as thinkers, as educators, but it's not finished. It's not already there. It's something that requires a continuous imaginative process and a continuous creation and recreation of also the very educational and democratic idea. So I'm finished. So what I want to say is that the pragmatist vision of democracy is we have seen, a deep ethical and practical implication, because it implies a strong connection between democratic forms of life and the cultivation of peace, like, for example, as we see in Jane Addams, was awarded the prize for peace, and strongly also connected to a new idea of society based on the reconstruction of the idea of community. And this is, I believe that this is particularly relevant within current political scenario. We face a war. We are in the middle of a war in Europe, and there are several tensions and critical situation all around the world. So I believe that this idea that democracy is connected to the idea of social development and the reconstruction of social bonds and social structure is essential to reconstruct a new social order that now we are losing. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Maura. Now, comments on this lecture will be made by Professor Dr. José Crisóstomo de Souza from the Federal University of Bahia. Os comentários sobre essa palestra serão feitos pelo professor Dr. José Crisóstomo de Souza, da Universidade Federal da Bahia. Professor Crisóstomo, a palavra é sua. Fique à vontade.
Muito obrigado. Estou sendo ouvido satisfatoriamente. Então, eu vou comentar em português, naturalmente, mas lendo do texto em inglês, que foi o que eu tive tempo de escrever. Então, eu vou fazer uma fala um pouco hesitante, porque eu vou estar lendo diretamente do inglês. Eu já seria hesitante de qualquer forma. Vocês ficam avisados. Deixa eu dizer uma coisinha para a audiência de língua inglesa. I need to say a few words to the audience in English. I didn't have time to make a final correction. There are a couple of bad mistakes. The main one is when I refer to a classist division of Wales, it says classicist division of Wales. There will be also final sentences that I have added and that you don't have in English, but I will, at the end, I'll try to say it in English for you. Certo? Então, vamos ao texto, a fala em português. Uma visão pragmatista da democracia como uma terceira via para as nossas sociedades ou para nossos países. Calorosas saudações para todos. É uma honra, uma alegria estar aqui, convidado pelo grande pragmatista e amigo meu, Ivo Ibre, para uma pequena participação em outro de seus e do seu time fabulosos encontros internacionais de pragmatismo. Eu vou agora comentar o pragmatismo como a terceira via para a democracia, como apresentados concisamente, de modo inspirador, numa série de slides, a original, acho que alguma coisa foi mudada aí, pela distinta professora Maura Striano, da Universidade de Napoli, Frederico II, Itália. Eu vou repeti-la em boa medida. O que eu vou dizer, de certa forma, uma anuência ao que ela diz. Onde está o pragmatismo entre outras visões de democracia e outras vias para o seu desenvolvimento? Em que sentido o pragmatismo é uma terceira via? A professora Striano começa com a narrativa do professor de Harvard, Samuel Huntington, acerca das ondas sucessivas de democracia liberal em propagação, mundo afora, começando no século XIX com os Estados Unidos e alguns países da Europa, e então espalhando-se para uma maior parte da Europa, depois da Segunda Guerra Mundial, e do sul da Europa nos anos 70, e na América Latina nos anos 80, e mais sucessivamente do sul global, África, Ásia, em diferentes ocasiões. Huntington, me permitam recordar, é um analista político conservador, historicamente informado, conselheiro de governos como o governo do regime apartheidista da África do Sul, Botha, e da ditadura militar brasileira, na pessoa do general Garrastazu Médici de triste memória. Ele é muito conhecido pela ideia, que não é dele, de um embate contemporâneo entre civilizações. Vocês já ouviram falar disso? Uma teoria que, por acaso, parece tomar o Brasil como parte de uma civilização americana e a Itália, onde a professora Striano está, como parte de outra, dominante, aquela ocidental. Efetivamente, o professor Huntington não parece mostrar qualquer interesse pelas assimetrias remanescentes antidemocráticas e neocoloniais, econômicas, políticas e até raciais da presente ordem mundial que separa o sul global do oeste. A professora Striano nos conta que a propagação mencionada da democracia tem sido acompanhada por sugestões de pessoas, de filósofos como nós, de tons e formas diferentes para uma realização melhor da democracia, tais como democracias deliberativas, inclusivas, recognitivas e agonísticas, às quais poderíamos acrescentar, não é o que a professora Striano faz, a democracia identitária e pós-estruturalista, e mencionar aqui a sugestão dessa linha de que a democracia liberal é efetivamente uma máscara superficial do que seria, no fundo, a mesma coisa que um fascismo. Uma tese que nós, pragmatistas, não podemos aceitar, nem os brasileiros, agora, sob ameaças reais de intervenção e antidemocracia. A professora Striano ainda observa que a mencionada propagação global da democracia resultou envolver uma democratização dupla, ou seja, tanto doméstica como internacional, uma transnacionalização da democracia em instituições internacionais, algo que tem sido criticado tanto por comunitaristas como por realistas políticos. Ela menciona também contranarrativas opostas à democracia, à pretensão da democracia liberal a um universalismo oferecida por países como a Rússia, a China e a Turquia. Ela menciona, além disso, desafios internos às próprias democracias clássicas metropolitanas de nossos dias, trazidas por um extremo neoliberalismo, desregulação, erosão institucional, autoritarismo, alt-right, direita alternativa, e pós-democracia. Agora, finalmente, chegamos ao pragmatismo como uma terceira via para a democracia. Terceira, poderia-se imaginar, entre a democracia liberal, de um lado, e talvez, do outro lado, essa democracia desregulada ou autoritária de tipo radical neoliberal, ou talvez até em relação ao socialismo, ou talvez ainda com relação à afinada democracia popular e comunista. Nos 18 slides não ficou totalmente claro para mim de qual dupla se tratava. Quanto à democracia do pragmatismo, a professora Striano não se refere, isso não é uma crítica, à posição anti-individualista, antinominalista de Peirce, que alguns acham que afeta Dewey. A sua epistemologia comunal, comunitária, se quiserem. Nem se refere ao evangelho do amor, como oposto ao suposto evangelho da ganância de Wall Street, que também poderiam acrescentar a uma diferente democracia, via de democracia. Ela não evoca tampouco de William James sua posição anticolonialista e anti-imperial, nem invoca o solidarismo liberal de Richard Bott. Isso no campo do pragmatismo, para lembrar esse aporte maior, porque, afinal de contas, o título foi Pragmatismo, terceira via. Mas ela escolhe, e eu acho de maneira perfeitamente justificável, considerar somente John Dewey e Jane Addams as suas contribuições particularmente relevantes e inspiradoras para esse tópico, isto é, para uma democracia popular, viva, enriquecedora, enriquecida e enriquecedora. Como ponto de partida, eu diria, Dewey e Jane Addams tomam a noção de que os indivíduos e a sociedade são orgânicos uns com relação à outra. E a democracia, como ponto de partida também, como uma forma de vida que envolve, primeiro, uma ética da vida comum e do bem comum, uma associação verdadeiramente moral e espiritual entre pessoas. Segundo, um permanente aperfeiçoamento da democracia para o florescimento de todos e de cada um, da própria comunidade e da própria vida. Um experimentalismo inspirado na ciência, da ciência não entendida do modo positivista ou empirista abstrato, mas como uma livre investigação, discussão, experimentação e correção social de crenças e valores. A democracia, a professora Striano nos lembra, deve permitir um testar e um validar ideias e valores, onde a própria prática concretamente determinaria e daria forma a novas soluções sociais, econômicas e políticas. Isso também convida a democracia a ser criativa e imaginativa a favor de novos arranjos e mudanças sociais, materiais, institucionais. E, consequentemente, essa ideia de democracia exige uma educação diferente para uma política, tanto quanto uma política diferente. Requer mudança em relações políticas, práticas, sociais, materiais, em instituições sociais e na economia política. A igualdade, um desses valores, nesse contexto, não significa, como na matemática, equivalência, mas uma consideração pela riqueza representada pela insubstituibilidade, tá bom? E incomensurabilidade de cada um de nós e de todos nós, e isso a favor de novas possibilidades da vida humana. Particularmente, do meu ponto de vista, interessante nesses dias de linguocentrismo e intersubjetivismo dominantes em filosofia política, ou seja, pós-estruturalismo e ética da comunicação, da intersubjetividade, o conhecimento, tanto em filosofia continental como em filosofia analítica, nesse caso mais epistemologicamente, a concepção de democracia de Dewey e de Addams, diferente dessas, parece, em várias maneiras, ser também uma concepção materialista. Ela adota até mesmo, essa ideia de democracia compreende até mesmo uma ideia de democracia industrial, que pressupõe uma economia industrial fordista. Para nossos dias, certamente, algum tipo de democracia inclusiva pós-industrial, que eu imagino questiona isso, então, esse materialismo, essa alusão à democracia industrial. Questiona, eu imagino, a própria ideia de uma educação tradicional, humanista, emancipatória, principalmente orientada discursiva e intersubjetivamente, ao que eu tinha me referido mais acima. Contra uma visão classista da riqueza, esta perspectiva de democracia sustenta um engajamento produtivo de indivíduos associados para seu próprio benefício e da sua comunidade, por meio de novos modelos de desenvolvimento econômico e de organização social. Eu chamaria de construcionismo institucional, que acho que é fiel ao espírito de Adams e Dewey. Como a professora Striano nos mostra, não somente precisamos um ethos democrático contra um capitalismo descontrolado como causa primária de violência doméstica e internacional, certo? Não somente precisamos condições econômicas e sociais melhores para as pessoas, mas também precisamos de meios econômicos, materiais próprios, capacidades, propriedade para o empoderamento institucional, material, cooperativo das pessoas. Isso é tudo muito sinteticamente exposto. Isso seria o que nós podemos chamar não uma democracia e uma cidadania formais, legais, passivas, mas também uma democracia e uma cidadania protagonistas e materiais. Esse é o pragmatismo produtivo democrático que eu vejo no duo Dewey e Adams. Isto é, o seu ponto de vista do agente é um ponto de vista do agente criativo, prático, produtivo, tornado um cidadão democrático, prático, criativo, em termos também materiais, numa democracia econômica inclusiva, numa ordem mundial, política e economicamente também democrática. Essa é a frase que está faltando na parte em inglês. Eu não me referi aqui a algo que eu acho que essas circunstâncias ameaçadoras novas à democracia incluem, que é a dimensão afetiva da política, que tem sido acionada por setores os mais antidemocráticos e reacionários, perante os quais o iluminismo universalista nosso e talvez o próprio pragmatismo não tenham resposta satisfatória, embora eu acredite que o pragmatismo, mais do que o universalismo liberal, tem sim. É isso. Obrigado.
Muito obrigado, professor Crisóstomo de Souza, por sua explanação. Agora, deixo aberto para quem quiser fazer pergunta. Então, now we open to anyone who wants to ask questions to put on chat.
Romanello, desculpe, será que a professora não quer rebater alguma coisa ou comentar antes? Passar um pouco a palavra para ela, desculpe.
Professora Maura Striano, se vuole parlare, if you want to speak any, if you want to reply his comments, please do so.
Yes, thank you. I thank Professor de Souza for his comments and his understanding. And the way I have chosen to refer to Dewey and Adams is connected to my the practical, my focus on ethical and practical implications of the idea of democracy. So I wanted to share this understanding of democracy, which starts, as I said before, from the experience of a Hull House, which was a community of people living together, sharing goods, and trying to develop a model of associated life that could be replicated outside. So, this was particularly relevant within the context of the Chicago industrial life. So it was a different social model, and I believe that this was an inspiration of this idea of practical and ethical declination of democracy as a way of community life. And I believe that now we should think to focus on democracy based on the reconstruction of our communities, according to a different way of being together, our families, our social communities, our local communities. I am, at the moment, I am the counselor of education in my town, and I am really looking at the necessity to develop a new forms of associated life in order to bring about the sense and the meaning of democratic life. And I believe it is important to focus on this idea of democracy. That's why I focused on these two visions of democracy and the context where they developed. I believe it was specular somehow to our capitalist and post-industrial society.
Professor Crisóstomo?
Oh, yeah, I think it's a very legitimate and adequate focus, and for our times and our circumstances, perhaps down below here in global South contexts, the realization of such solidarity in economic and material terms would be very relevant, more or less like on the funny saying, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, not. There is a lot of behind the mounting wave of fascism. There is a lot of disillusion of people with the results of the usual democratic liberal arrangement for their material lives, which are the family lives too, the homes, the food, the meals, and even their ambitions and aspirations too. But of course, this is another topic, and it does not deny your emphasis at all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Crisóstomo. Any question? If so, please write down on chat. Okay, so we will finish. I invite everyone to the round table that will take place in a few minutes. And we have about 5 speakers from Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo,